Quarantine arrangements for nurses arriving from overseas. NHS trusts to provide managed quarantine accommodation, hospital-managed quarantine for internationally recruited nurses who are taking up immediate employment in the NHS in England, and who are from, or travelling through a red-listed countries. And does not cover nurses already employed by the NHS or nurses returning from abroad for any other reason, for example, holiday or visiting family. Nurses are exempt from Red List Hotel Managed Quarantine, also known as Managed Quarantine Service or MQS, if compliant NHS trust-arranged accommodation can be used for the duration of their quarantine period. Trusts may choose not to use the exemption and to fund for managed quarantine services an alternative. NHS trusts are responsible for the safe and effective quarantine of all nurses in hospital-managed quarantine and must ensure adherence to these guidelines. When nurses are recruited as a cohort and travel together from and or through red-listed countries, they may be considered a travel group. This means they will be able to quarantine together and share facilities. Regardless of cohort sizes for flights, on arrival in the UK, travel group numbers should be minimized and be no larger than 6 individuals, as smaller group sizes reduce the risk of many nurses being delayed from starting work should a member of the travel group test positive for COVID-19. All recommended control measures, including maintaining social distancing, wearing face coverings and hand washing, will be required within a travel group throughout quarantine. It only covers nurses coming from or traveling through red list countries to take up immediate NHS employment in England. Eligibility does not extend to family or dependents. If nurses are bringing children or family, the family unit as a whole will need to quarantine in an approved hotel. Before departure, the trust will need to provide the nurse with a letter setting out their eligibility for the exemption, for the benefit of Border Force officials on arrival. This letter should include the following details: full name, date of birth, name of employing trust and trust contact number, passport number, certificate of sponsorship number, date of arrival, arrival airport. Nurses must be able to travel from the airport to hospital-managed quarantine accommodation in COVID-19 secure private including trust-owned transport. Nurses must go straight to meet the trust representative driver on arrival at the airport. They must not use facilities once through immigration control. Hospital-managed accommodation for quarantining nurses must be private or trust-provided accommodation, and the building must be used exclusively for quarantining. The accommodation must provide individual ensuite bathroom facilities and individual food facilities for nurses quarantining alone. Nurses in quarantine must have access to suitable food and drink, taking into account personal, religious or social dietary requirements, either provided by the trust or using facilities provided to access this, for example, refrigerators, kettles, microwaves, hobs, ovens, cutlery and crockery, an on-call provision from the trust to check on the nurses each day. This may be informal, for example via WhatsApp or regular phone calls, a contact number and access to a telephone for a point of contact at the trust for the duration of the quarantine. From testing on day 2, when the nurse takes their pre-flight test, to the end of the quarantine period, nurses must follow all control measures in place to minimize the risk of spreading COVID-19. Nurses quarantining in hospital-managed accommodation must travel directly to their place of quarantine and not leave until 10 days have passed. The day of arrival is counted as day 0. The day after arrival is day 1. Isolate or stay with their self-contained travel group. Comply with day 2 and day 8 testing. Nurses quarantining in hospital accommodation must not have visitors, leave the premises, use any communal facilities that have not been allocated to their self-contained travel group, go outside, unless an outside area has been set aside for use of one self-contained travel group. Additional services will be provided such as cleaning, laundry and waste collection. Nurses must take a coronavirus, COVID-19, test and get a negative result during the 3 days before travel to the UK. Nurses quarantining in hospital accommodation must take COVID-19 PCR tests on day 2 and day 8. These are the tests ordered at the time of booking travel and are not to be provided by the trust. Nurses must take a COVID-19 test on or before day 2 of the quarantine period. A welcome pack to provide information and practical support to nurses during their quarantine should be supplied on arrival. This will give an overview of the requirements of the quarantine process. Trust should provide newly arrived nurses with information about the COVID-19 vaccine. For those nurses who have not yet received vaccination for COVID-19 in their home country, arrangements should be made to receive COVID-19 vaccination as soon as possible following completion of quarantine.